My name is Sandra, and at 57, I thought my life was settled after 32 years of marriage to David, the successful CEO of Meridian Technologies. We had it all: the Beacon Hill mansion luxury vacations and respect in Boston's elite circles. Then came the dinner party celebrating our daughter's engagement. I had noticed David's executive assistant Morgan looking at him differently lately. That night, everything changed with two announcements, one expected, one not. Before I continue my story, where are you watching from today? Hit that like and subscribe button, because you'll want to see what happens when betrayal meets a woman who refuses to be discarded. I met David Adams during my final year at Boston University, where I was completing my marketing degree with dreams of conquering the advertising world. He was 3 years older already, working at a tech startup with ambitious plans. His confidence captivated me, and within a year we were married. I was 25, bright-eyed, and believing we would conquer the world as equals. For the first few years, we did exactly that. I built a promising career at a top marketing firm, while David worked to establish his company, Meridian Technologies. We supported each other's dreams, staying up late, discussing business strategies and market opportunities. When our daughter Julia was born 2 years later, we adjusted but maintained our partnership approach. I scaled back slightly, but continued working. Everything shifted when Meridian secured its first major contract. David's company suddenly required more attention, more networking, more late nights. When Michael was born 3 years after Julia, the demands of managing two young children and David's increasingly busy schedule fell primarily to me. Gradually, almost imperceptibly, my promising career became secondary. "It's just temporary," David would say. "Once the company stabilizes, you can refocus on your career." But that moment never came. Instead, as Meridian Technologies grew into a regional powerhouse in enterprise software solutions, my marketing expertise was redirected to becoming the perfect corporate wife. I hosted dinner parties for potential investors, attended charity galas to network, and raised our children to reflect well on the Adams family name. By the time Julia and Michael reached high school, I realized my corporate skills had become outdated. David had become accustomed to my support role, and whenever I mentioned returning to work, he would say, "Why would you want to start over at the bottom when we have everything we need?" His success had become our identity, and somewhere along the way, I accepted it. Our Boston Beacon Hill home became a showcase of David's success: 6 bedrooms, meticulously maintained gardens, and an interior designed by professionals who never asked for my input. I became an accessory in my own life, the elegant wife who appeared at the right moments, said the right things, and never caused problems. Julia grew up to become a brilliant architect, stubborn and creative like her father, but with a warmth he often lacked. Michael followed more in David's footsteps, attending business school and working in finance, always seeking his father's elusive approval. My children loved me, but I sometimes wondered if they truly knew me beyond the role of supportive mother and wife. 2 years ago, David hired a new executive assistant, Morgan Williams. At 32, she was strikingly beautiful, with perfect blonde hair, designer clothes, and an MBA from Wharton. From our first meeting at the company Christmas party, something about her made me uncomfortable. The way she maintained eye contact with David, a beat too long. How she laughed at his jokes with practiced appreciation. The subtle way she would touch his arm when speaking to him. "You're imagining things," I told myself. "Don't become the jealous older wife stereotype." So I invited her to dinner parties, asked about her family in Wisconsin, and even helped her find an apartment when she mentioned housing troubles, all while ignoring the growing knot in my stomach. 6 months ago, David's behavior began changing subtly. More late nights at the office, weekend work emergencies, new cologne, password changes on his phone. The classic signs I'd heard friends discuss but never thought would apply to my marriage. Still, I said nothing, gathering information, watching and waiting. 3 days before our dinner party celebrating Julia's engagement to her partner Alex, I noticed David's phone lighting up while he showered. Against character, I looked. The text from Morgan read, "Can't wait to tell everyone our news. Are you ready?" His reply, "Let me handle it. Sandra deserves better than this. I felt the room spin but forced myself to breathe. Sandra deserves better than this. At least he got that part right. The evening of our dinner party arrived with perfect New England spring weather. I had spent the day preparing our formal dining room, arranging white roses, Julia's favorite, in crystal vases, and setting our finest china. The caterers had prepared a magnificent meal, and our home looked immaculate. On the surface, everything was perfect, just like our marriage had appeared. I wore a navy blue dress that David had always complimented my silver hair, styled elegantly, pearl earrings completing the sophisticated look expected of me. As I applied my lipstick, I studied my reflection. Fine lines mapped decades of smiles and worries across my face. When had I started looking so carefully composed? Rather than naturally happy, Julia and Alex arrived first, her excitement obvious as she hugged me tightly. "Everything looks beautiful, Mom," she said, admiring the table setting. At 30, my daughter had my height and David's determined chin, her dark hair cut in a stylish bob that framed her face perfectly. "Nothing but the best for my future bride," I replied, genuinely happy for her. Alex, a kind structural engineer who clearly adored Julia, shook my hand warmly and complimented the house as though he hadn't visited dozens of times before. Michael arrived next with his girlfriend Tara, whom he'd been dating for 8 months. At 28, my son had grown into a handsome young man who resembled his father in his ambitious years before success had softened David's physique and hardened his outlook. "Where's Dad?" Michael asked immediately, always eager for his father's approval. "Still getting ready," I answered, not mentioning that David had called to say he was running late at the office and would arrive separately. When the doorbell rang again 30 minutes later, I opened it, expecting to see only David. Instead, he stood on our porch with Morgan beside him, her hand casually resting on his arm in a gesture of intimacy that sent ice through my veins. "Morgan wanted to join us for Julia's celebration," David explained without meeting my eyes. "I hope that's okay." Before I could respond, Morgan stepped forward. "I hope I'm not intruding, Sandra. David mentioned what a special night this is, and I brought champagne to celebrate." She handed me an expensive bottle, her perfect red manicure contrasting against the gold label. I accepted the bottle with the practiced smile of a woman who had hosted hundreds of corporate events. "How thoughtful. Please come in." Julia shot me a questioning look as I introduced Morgan to those who hadn't met her. My daughter had always been perceptive, and I could see her cataloging the unnecessary touches and familiar gestures between Morgan and her father. Through the appetizer course, we maintained pleasant conversation. Julia and Alex shared their initial wedding plans, while Michael discussed a promising investment opportunity. David seemed distracted, checking his watch repeatedly, while Morgan watched him with barely concealed anticipation. When the main course arrived, Julia officially announced her September wedding date, showing everyone the venue photos on her phone. "We've been waiting for the perfect moment to finalize everything," she explained happily. David stood raising his glass. "To Julia and Alex, your mother and I couldn't be prouder of the woman you've become, Julia, and the life you're building together." Everyone raised their glasses, and in that moment of celebration, Morgan cleared her throat and stood. "Since we're sharing happy news," she said, her voice carrying a triumphant note, "David and I have an announcement too." The room fell silent. David's face paled, but he didn't stop her. Morgan placed her hand on her still flat stomach and looked directly at me with a slight smirk. "I'm pregnant. David and I are expecting a baby in November." The crystal glasses in my children's hands froze midair. Alex looked at the floor. Tara's mouth opened slightly in shock. "Dad," Julia's voice broke the silence, hurt and confusion evident in that single word. David stood awkwardly, running his hand through his salt and pepper hair. "This isn't how I wanted you all to find out," he said, not denying Morgan's claim. "Sandra and I have grown apart over the years. These things happen. Morgan and I, it just happened." "Just happened," Michael repeated incredulously. "Getting someone pregnant just happens when you're 16, not 59. Julia pushed back from the table, her eyes filling with tears. How could you do this to Mom? To our family? She grabbed Alex's hand. I can't believe you brought your mistress to my engagement dinner. Morgan's confident smile faltered slightly. I thought it would be better to have everything in the open. We're going to be family after all. I sat perfectly still, watching the scene unfold like an observer, rather than the central figure in this drama. My children's anger warmed me somehow, their instinctive defense filling a space I hadn't realized had grown cold. Will everyone excuse me for a moment? I finally said, my voice steady. I need to get something from my study. As I walked from the dining room, I heard David attempting damage control, his voice taking on the authoritative tone he used in board meetings. But for once, I knew something he didn't. 3 months earlier, I had been looking for a receipt in David's desk when I found hotel charges from dates when he claimed to be at business conferences. That discovery led me to dig deeper, eventually finding a pattern of meetings with Morgan outside office hours and text messages that left little doubt about their relationship. My first instinct was confrontation, but something stopped me. Perhaps it was 32 years of being the supportive wife, or maybe it was simple self-preservation. Instead, I called Catherine Barnes, a board member at Meridian Technologies and my friend since college. We met for lunch at a quiet restaurant far from David's usual haunts. I need to know the truth about Meridian's current position, I told her, after explaining what I discovered about David and Morgan. Catherine hesitated, loyalty clearly conflicting with friendship. This conversation never happened, she finally said, lowering her voice. Meridian is in a vulnerable position right now. The Phoenix project is behind schedule and over budget. 2 major clients are threatening to walk. The board is concerned that David seems distracted. Distracted by his 32-year-old assistant, I said flatly. It's not my place to comment on that, Catherine replied carefully. But yes, his focus has been questioned. Several board members have discussed approaching you actually. Me, why? Because despite stepping back from your career, you've maintained connections throughout the industry. Because you understand the company's history and vision better than anyone. Because you've been the secret weapon behind David's success for decades, even if he doesn't acknowledge it. I considered her words carefully. What exactly are you suggesting, Catherine? Nothing officially, but hypothetically, if someone with substantial industry connections and knowledge of Meridian were to approach certain investors who are dissatisfied with current leadership, interesting conversations might occur. That lunch became the first of many strategic meetings. I reconnected with former colleagues who had risen to positions of influence. I studied Meridian's public financial reports and through discreet channels learned about the company's current challenges. David, believing me to be planning Julia's engagement party, never questioned my suddenly busy schedule. I discovered that Morgan had a history of relationships with executives at previous companies. I learned that David had been borrowing against our personal assets to maintain his lifestyle while the company struggled. Most importantly, I identified key shareholders who were concerned about Meridian's direction. Through careful negotiations and leveraging my own separate investments, I gradually acquired shares in Meridian Technologies. With Catherine's guidance, I formed alliances with board members concerned about the company's future. By the time Morgan announced her pregnancy at our dinner table, I had secured the support needed for an emergency board vote. The folder I retrieved from my study contained the official board resolution naming me interim CEO of Meridian Technologies, effective immediately, along with documentation of my newly acquired controlling interest in the company. As I walked back to the dining room with the folder in hand, I felt a strange calm. For decades, I had subsumed my ambitions to support David's. I had raised our children, managed our home, hosted his business associates, and stood by his side, all while he apparently viewed me as expendable. This was not how I'd imagined my life at 57, but perhaps it was exactly what I needed. When I returned to the dining room, David was mid-sentence explaining to our children how these situations are complicated and no one means to hurt anyone. Morgan sat beside him, her hand possessively on his arm, her earlier smirk replaced by a tight smile as she faced our family's open hostility. I placed the folder on the table and resumed my seat at the opposite end from David. Everyone fell silent, perhaps expecting tears or accusations. "Morgan," I said calmly, "congratulations on your pregnancy. Children are always a blessing regardless of the circumstances of their conception." I turned to David. "And congratulations to you as well. Becoming a father again at 59 is certainly unexpected." David looked relieved at my apparent acceptance, though our children appeared shocked by my composure. "Since we're sharing life changes," I continued opening the folder, "I also have an announcement." I removed the board resolution and slid it across the table to David. "Effective immediately, I am the new Chief Executive Officer of Meridian Technologies." David stared at the document, his face transitioning from confusion to disbelief. "This is impossible. The board can't do this without my knowledge." "The emergency board meeting was called yesterday." I explained, my voice level. "Catherine kept you distracted with budget discussions while it occurred. 7 of the 9 board members voted in favor, citing concerns about your recent judgment and focus." "What are you talking about?" David's voice rose as he flipped through the documents. "You can't run Meridian. You've been out of business for decades." I removed the second document from my folder. This might explain things further. I now control 28% of Meridian's shares, making me the largest individual shareholder. Combined with the support of other key investors representing another 30%, my position is quite secure. Morgan's hand dropped from David's arm as the implications became clear. "But you're just his wife," she said, her voice smaller than before. "You run charity luncheons, not technology companies." "I was a rising marketing executive before I became just his wife," I corrected her. "And while planning those charity luncheons, I built relationships with half the business leaders in Boston. People talk to the CEO's wife, share information they wouldn't with the CEO himself." I looked directly at David. "Did you really think I spent 30 years just smiling and pouring coffee?" Julia's shock transformed into a smile. "Mom, this is impressive." Michael looked between David and me, clearly struggling to process this power shift. "What happens to Dad?" "Your father will transition to a non-executive advisory role," I answered. "His institutional knowledge remains valuable, but Meridian needs focused leadership to address its current challenges, including the failing Phoenix project and the exodus of key clients." David's face flushed with anger. "You've been planning this behind my back while I've been building this company for decades." "Just like you planned your new family behind mine," I replied without raising my voice. "The difference is, my decisions are business-based and approved by the board. And unlike you, I'm not throwing away 32 years of partnership for a predictable midlife crisis." Morgan pushed back her chair abruptly. "This is ridiculous. David, tell her she can't do this." David stared at the document's lawyer enough to recognize their legitimacy. "Sandra, we should discuss this privately." "We'll have plenty of time for discussions during the leadership transition," I said. "For now, I believe this dinner party has concluded. Julia, Alex, I'm so sorry this special announcement was overshadowed." Julia stood and hugged me tightly. "Are you kidding? This is the best engagement present ever." She whispered in my ear, "I'm so proud of you, Mom." As David and Morgan left, his hand on her lower back, guiding her out, I remained seated at the head of my table, surrounded by my children and their partners. The dinner party had certainly not gone as planned, but for the first time in years, I felt fully present in my own life. My first week as CEO of Meridian Technologies revealed exactly how much David had been neglecting the business while pursuing his relationship with Morgan. The Phoenix project, meant to be our next-generation enterprise solution, was 8 months behind schedule and nearly double its budget. 2 major clients had already reduced their contracts, and 3 more were threatening to leave entirely. The executive team, mostly men who had been with David for years, regarded me with barely concealed skepticism. During my first leadership meeting, Bradford Wells, the chief financial officer, spoke over me repeatedly and directed his responses to the male executives rather than to me. "Brad, I finally said, interrupting his explanation of why we couldn't possibly adjust the Phoenix timeline. I reviewed the project documentation last night. The delays stem primarily from feature creep that nobody authorized, but everyone accommodated. As of today, we're freezing the feature set and focusing on delivering core functionality to clients by the end of the quarter. With all due respect, Mrs. Adams, CO Adams or Sandra, please. Mrs. Adams suggests I'm here as David's wife rather than your chief executive. He flushed slightly. The development team won't be able to meet that timeline. I spoke with Rajiv in development this morning at 6. He believes they can deliver if management stops changing requirements weekly. We're implementing proper change control processes effective immediately. The room fell silent as the executives realized I had been doing my homework while they were underestimating me. At home, changes were equally dramatic. David moved to a downtown apartment the day after the dinner party, taking only personal items and leaving without much discussion. The household staff looked to me uncertainly until I assured them their jobs were secure. The most challenging moment came when Morgan appeared at my office 3 days after I took over. My assistant, a competent woman named Diane, who had immediately aligned herself with me, appeared at my door looking uncomfortable. Miss Williams is here to see you. She doesn't have an appointment. I set aside the client report I was reviewing. Send her in, please. Morgan entered wearing an impeccable black maternity dress, though she couldn't be showing yet. Her expression combined defensiveness with calculation. Sandra, she began, I thought we should talk woman to woman. CEO to employee, I corrected. Please have a seat. She sat stiffly. I want to clarify that my relationship with David won't affect my work performance. I'm excellent at my job. I've reviewed your performance evaluations, I said neutrally. David rated you highly, though I've noticed your actual output doesn't quite match those ratings. Her chin lifted slightly. I handle confidential matters for David that wouldn't appear in standard metrics. I'm sure you do. However, as David is no longer CEO, that role has changed. I've restructured the executive assistant position to support the executive team rather than a single individual. You're firing me. Her composure slipped. Not at all. I'm offering you a choice. You can join the restructured administrative team, reporting to Diane, or you can accept a generous severance package. I slid a folder across my desk. The details are inside. Both options include continued health coverage for your pregnancy, regardless of your relationship status with David. Morgan stared at me clearly, having expected either emotional confrontation or immediate termination. You've thought of everything. I've had years of practice considering all angles while others underestimated me, I replied. I'll need your decision by Friday. After she left, I allowed myself a moment to acknowledge the pain beneath my professional exterior. This woman was carrying my husband's child while I was rebuilding the company he had neglected for her. The unfairness burned, but I channeled that energy into my next meeting with potential new clients. By the end of my first month as CEO, Meridian had stabilized somewhat. I had met personally with our wavering clients, negotiated realistic timelines, and begun rebuilding trust. The Phoenix project had been refocused and showed promising initial results. The board expressed cautious optimism about my leadership. David, meanwhile, attended his advisory meetings sporadically and with obvious resentment. During one particularly tense session, he interrupted my presentation to the development team. This approach ignores everything we've built over 20 years, he argued. Sandra, you're going to drive this company into the ground with these changes. I maintained my composure while everyone watched our interaction carefully. The quarterly numbers suggest otherwise, David. Your advisory input is noted, but as discussed, final decisions rest with current leadership. After the meeting, he followed me to my office, his former office now redecorated in cool blues rather than the dark mahogany he had preferred. How long are you going to punish me? He demanded once the door closed. I looked at him directly, this man I had loved for over 3 decades. This isn't punishment, David. This is consequence. You made choices that affected our family and neglected the company in the process. I'm making choices to protect both by taking everything from me. You still own 20% of a company that's now increasing in value rather than declining. You're still father to our children, though you've damaged those relationships. You're building a new family with Morgan. I straightened papers on my desk. What exactly have I taken that you didn't willingly risk? He had no answer for that. While I grew more confident professionally, my personal life underwent equally significant changes. The first few weeks after David moved out, I would wake in our king-size bed feeling disoriented, reaching for someone no longer there. Despite the betrayal, 32 years of marriage left muscle memory that couldn't be erased overnight. During the day, I could focus on Meridian's challenges, but evenings in our large home echoed with emptiness. One Tuesday night, I found myself sitting alone at our dining table, the same one where Morgan had made her announcement, and I finally allowed myself to cry. Not delicate tears, but body-shaking sobs that released decades of suppressed disappointment and the fresh wound of betrayal. The next day, I called Dr. Eleanor Wright, a therapist recommended by Catherine. I need to process what's happening, I told her during our first session. I'm functioning well at work, but at home I feel lost. You've experienced multiple significant changes simultaneously, Dr. Wright observed. It's natural to compartmentalize to cope initially, but eventually we need to integrate these experiences. Over weekly sessions, I examined not just David's betrayal, but my own complicity in becoming secondary in my life. We discussed how I had gradually surrendered my identity to support his believing that was what a good wife did. What would you tell Julia if her partner asked her to diminish herself? Dr. Wright asked during one particularly difficult session. The question stopped me cold. I'd tell her never to lose herself for someone else's comfort. Yet you did exactly that. I thought I was building something together with David, I explained. I didn't realize I was becoming invisible to him. Parallel to this emotional work, I began reconnecting with my children on a deeper level. Julia invited me to lunch one Saturday, ostensibly to discuss wedding plans, but her real purpose emerged quickly. "Are you really okay, Mom?" she asked, studying me intently. "You're so composed at work according to Michael's friends in finance. But this situation with Dad and her, it's a lot." "I'm working through it," I answered honestly. "Some days are harder than others, but I'm discovering parts of myself that got buried years ago, and that's actually exciting." Julia reached for my hand. I postponed the wedding. "What, Julia? No. Your father's choices shouldn't derail your happiness." She smiled sadly. "It's not just about Dad. I need time to rethink what marriage means. Watching what happened to you and Dad, I want to make sure Alex and I build something truly equal." I squeezed her hand. "Your relationship is nothing like ours was. You've maintained your separate identity and career. You communicate honestly. Because you taught me to value myself, even when you weren't always valuing yourself enough," she said. "The wedding will happen, just not this September. And when it does, I want you fully present as yourself, not managing some family facade." Michael proved more complicated. Having worked in finance, he initially seemed to side with David professionally while condemning his personal choices. During a tense Sunday brunch, he questioned my business strategies. "The development team thinks you're pushing too hard on Phoenix," he said. "Dad built relationships with those clients over years. They expect certain accommodations." "Those accommodations nearly bankrupted us," I replied calmly. "The clients actually respect clear boundaries and realistic promises more than constant acquiescence." Michael looked skeptical until his girlfriend Tara interjected. "Your mother's approach makes perfect sense from a client management perspective. My firm operates the same way." As an account director at a consulting company, Tara understood the dynamics well. Michael studied me with new eyes. I guess I assumed Dad's way was the only way because it's all I've seen. "We all did," I acknowledged. "That's changing now." Beyond family, I began rediscovering interests long set aside. I joined a book club with professional women my age, many also navigating major life transitions. I resumed swimming, a passion from college days, rising at 5 each morning to complete 30 laps before work. I also found myself building new business relationships. At an industry conference in Chicago, I met Lawrence Winters, CEO of a complementary software company. Our discussion about potential collaboration extended through dinner, where conversation flowed easily between professional and personal topics. "You've accomplished an extraordinary transition," he noted. "Most executives take years to develop the instincts you've demonstrated in months." "I've been watching and learning for decades," I replied, "just from the shadows." Lawrence's appreciative glance contained something I hadn't experienced in years, recognition of me as an intelligent, capable woman rather than an extension of David. We exchanged contact information for business purposes, but his parting comment suggested more. "Boston isn't far from Hartford. I'm there frequently for client meetings." 6 months into my tenure as CEO, I attended my first major industry gala in my new role. David would also be present, with Morgan now visibly pregnant, as he maintained relationships with industry colleagues. My stomach knotted at the prospect of this public encounter, but Dr. Wright had helped me prepare. I chose a deep emerald gown that complemented my silver hair and carried myself with the confidence born of Meridian's improving quarterly results. When David and Morgan entered the ballroom, whispers rippled through the crowd. Many of these people had attended our holiday parties and charity events over the years. Catherine appeared at my elbow. "Breathe, Sandra. You belong here more than anyone." I smiled gratefully and continued my conversation with the CEO of our newest client partner. Throughout the evening, I moved purposefully through the room, discussing Meridian's innovation roadmap and receiving congratulations on recent successes. When David and I inevitably crossed paths near the bar, cameras from industry publications captured the moment. "You look well, Sandra," he said stiffly. "Thank you. Meridian's third quarter results were just released. We've exceeded projections." "I saw that." A flash of something like regret crossed his face. "The board seems impressed with your leadership." "Change was needed. I'm providing it." I kept my tone professional, conscious of watching eyes. Morgan approached, her hand protectively over her rounded stomach. David placed his arm around her waist in a gesture that once would have devastated me. Now, I simply felt a distant sadness for what had been lost. "Congratulations on the Phoenix launch," Morgan said, surprising me with the professional acknowledgement. "The industry reviews are excellent." "Thank you. Rajiv's team deserves most of the credit." I nodded politely and moved toward another group, leaving David and his new life behind me. Later that evening, a technology journal published a photo of us with the caption, "Meridian's past and future former CEO, David Adams, with current CEO, Sandra Adams, whose leadership has reversed the company's declining market position." For the first time, I was not identified primarily as David's wife. That simple change represented everything. A year passed since the dinner that changed everything. Sitting in my office at Meridian Technologies, reviewing our most successful quarter to date, I reflected on the journey. The company had not only stabilized, but thrived under my leadership. The Phoenix project had launched to positive reviews, and we had secured 5 major new clients while strengthening relationships with existing ones. Our stock price had increased 22%, and industry analysts who had predicted disaster when a corporate wife took over now cited Meridian as a case study in effective leadership transition. My office door opened, and Diane entered with a tablet. "The board approved the European expansion unanimously," she reported, "and Lawrence Winters called about your dinner tonight." I smiled at the mention of Lawrence. Our professional collaboration had gradually evolved into a friendship, and recently something more. At 58, I hadn't expected to experience the anticipation of a promising new relationship, but Lawrence's thoughtful intelligence and genuine interest in me, not as an accessory, but as a full person, had awakened feelings I thought long dead. "Thanks, Diane. Please let Catherine know I'll call her about the board's questions on the Berlin office. As Diane left, Julia appeared in the doorway. At 31, my daughter looked happier than she had in months. Ready for lunch, Mom? Alex is meeting us at Maison Laurent. Just let me grab my coat. I logged out of my computer and collected my purse. How are the revised wedding plans coming? Perfect. The May date feels right, and the smaller venue suits us better. Julia linked her arm through mine as we walked toward the elevator. Alex and I had a good talk with our therapist about partnership expectations. It's amazing how much clearer everything became once we started being completely honest. I squeezed her arm. I'm so proud of you for doing that work before marriage rather than decades in. In the lobby, we passed Morgan pushing a stroller toward the Human Resources Department. Her 6-month-old son slept peacefully, unaware of the complicated circumstances surrounding his birth. Morgan nodded politely, our relationship now strictly professional, since she had accepted the restructured position rather than severance. According to office gossip, her relationship with David had deteriorated shortly after their son's birth, when the reality of parenting with a man approaching 60 collided with her expectations. Outside in the spring sunshine, Julia asked the question she'd been delicately avoiding. Have you decided about selling the house? The offer came through yesterday. I'm accepting it. The decision to sell the Beacon Hill home had been difficult but necessary. The penthouse downtown suits me better now. No more rooms filled with someone else's choices. The divorce had finalized 3 months earlier, with David receiving his 20% of Meridian, our vacation home in Martha's Vineyard, and various investments. I kept the majority of my newly acquired Meridian shares, my personal investments, and received the Beacon Hill house, which I promptly put on the market. The negotiations had been surprisingly civilized, perhaps because David had little moral ground for demands. Michael's coming around, you know, Julia mentioned as we walked. He finally admitted to Tara that you're running Meridian better than Dad did in his final years. I laughed softly. High praise indeed from your brother. He's bringing Tara to dinner Sunday. I think he might propose soon. I suspected as much when he asked about grandmother's ring last week. Julia stopped walking and turned to me. Mom, are you really happy? Not just functioning well or staying busy, but actually happy. I considered the question seriously. I'm content in ways I never expected. Building something meaningful at Meridian, reconnecting with you and Michael as adults, discovering new parts of myself. I thought of Lawrence and smiled. Even opening myself to new possibilities. It's not the life I planned, but yes, I'm happy. My daughter's eyes filled with tears. You deserved better than what Dad did. Perhaps, but I'm responsible for what I accepted for too long. I brushed a strand of hair from her face. The greatest gift from this painful year has been learning that it's never too late to reclaim yourself. At the restaurant, Alex waited with a small gift bag. Early Mother's Day, he explained as I opened it to find a beautiful fountain pen. Julia mentioned you've started journaling. Writing my thoughts helps me process everything, I acknowledged. Thank you, Alex. Over lunch, we discussed the upcoming wedding, Michael's relationship with Tara, and my plans for Meridian's next phase. Not once did we mention David, not because the wound remained too painful, but because he no longer defined our family narrative. That evening, preparing for dinner with Lawrence, I caught my reflection in the bathroom mirror. The woman who looked back at me stood straighter than she had a year ago. My silver hair, once colored regularly, at David's preference now shone naturally. The lines around my eyes spoke of both pain and laughter experienced fully. I realized I no longer searched for traces of the younger woman I had been trying to recapture, what age had transformed. Instead, I appreciated the wisdom in those lines, the strength in my capable hands, the clarity in my experienced eyes. When David and Morgan shattered the life I thought I had secured, they unknowingly freed me to build something authentic. The betrayal that I believed would destroy me instead revealed my capacity for renewal. At 58, I had discovered that endings often contain beginnings for those brave enough to step through the door that pain forces open. Looking back, would I choose this difficult path? Perhaps not. But standing where I am now, leading a successful company, rebuilding meaningful family relationships, opening myself to new love, I recognize that sometimes the worst moments create space for our best possibilities. The journey continues, of course. Each day brings new challenges at Meridian, new dimensions to my relationships with my adult children, new discoveries about myself. But now I move forward, neither defined by my marriage nor limited by its dissolution. I am simply finally completely myself. Has life ever forced you to reinvent yourself when you least expected it? How did you discover strength you didn't know you possessed? Share your story in the comments below. And if my journey resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe to hear more stories of transformation. Remember, it's never too late to become the author of your own life. Thank you for listening, and may you find the courage to turn your challenges into opportunities for growth.